proud to introduce your keynote speaker for this year, Mr. Mike Mandel.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. It's an interesting thing because I'm closer to 70 than 60 now. And after 45 years of full-time hypnosis, I recognized when discussing with my wife some family matters the other day that my father passed away at 57, my mother at 53. And in my family, I'm way past the expiry date. And it was Chris Thompson, my business partner and best friend in the world, who's just down there, who encouraged me a few years ago. He said, you've got to get all this stuff that's in your head out there before you frickin' die. And I said, okay. So the real brains behind Mike Mandel Hypnosis is my dear friend, Chris Thompson. I've looked at my watch. I will go quickly, and I promise not to be maudlin. Thank you for listening. This is the first conference for some of you. How many of you have never been to Hypnothoughts Live before? Oh, what a great number. I applaud you. That's fantastic. This is the #1 hypnosis conference in the world. It's the one Chris and I will absolutely never miss. It is the most inclusive, the most friendly, where people from all stripes, all backgrounds in hypnosis can meet together, disagree on things, still be friends, and all learn from each other. And five Hypnothoughts ago, in 2015, when Chris and I came here, I didn't want to, because I was so freaking full of myself. I was like, don't they know who I think I am? I'm Mike Mandel. And it's like, why should we go? Chris said, no, these guys are great. I said, no, I've never seen good hypnosis trainers. I've seen so much crap. And then we came here, and I was blown away. And honestly, the trainers in this room that some of you don't even know yet, I can't even start naming them, because I'll leave someone out by accident, and they're all freaking brilliant. There is so much hypnotic power in this room right now. It's just ridiculous. And you have the best trainers in the world at this conference. Make sure you can learn from as many as possible. My topic is really hypnosis itself. I want to talk to you about where we are now, how we got here, and how we as a group of different stripes can ensure that we wind up somewhere really good against any sort of legislation that would attempt to shut us down, all the things that would keep us from banding together, where our strength is in our unity, without a doubt. So let me start with a simple thing here. When I was a kid, we had emigrated to Toronto, Canada, and I see the hypnotic storm is in the house with all the shirts. We'd come from Toronto, Canada, to Toronto from England, and weirdly, I was born at home in Britain. That's what happened back then. I was born at 34 Welbeck Avenue in Chatterton, which is part of Manchester. And I learned to be Canadian very, very quickly. Came over at age 4. And all the time I was growing up, I spoke like this when I was in high school and public school. And when I was at home, I spoke like this because I was a Mancunian when I was at home. Aren't you glad I broke free of that, or I'd be doing the keynote with a stupid accent like this? Anyway, the two were parallel. I clearly had an ego state issue there. But my parents fell in love with the eastern seaboard of the United States. We loved New England, and we used to vacation in Connecticut, and especially through Massachusetts and Maine, and go to Cape Cod all the time. And it reminds me of a remarkable story I heard once. It was a story of a man who lived in Kennebunkport, Maine. And the North Atlantic is known for the incredible storms that will come up, especially in the fall. And Kennebunkport, right on the coast, rocky, beautiful. The man made a practice of every time there had been an incredible rainfall, he would go the next day and beachcomb and see what had washed up, especially if it was a thunderstorm as well. The sea would swell. And one night there was an immense storm. And the next day, even though it was still raining and still windy, he decided to go for a walk. And he went down to the beach. He was the only one there under the gray scudding clouds and the drizzling rain. And he began to walk. And there were patches of seaweed washed up on the beach and shells. And as he made his path ahead of him, looking ahead all the time, he saw no other human being for about 10 minutes. And just when he was about to pack it in because he was getting wet and chilled, he saw someone else on the horizon, the far end of the beach. And he kept walking. And he could tell this person was doing something, but he couldn't tell what it was. He couldn't tell what it was. There was some activity going on. And as he got closer, he realized it was a boy, a small boy. And the boy was throwing stones into the Atlantic Ocean. with alarming frequency. The man found this interesting. You see, we can learn a lot from small children. That phase from age 0 to 7, that imprint phase when the traumas get put in, and the strengths can get put in as well, is something that we as hypnotists can make a profound difference in someone's life if we get there and fix it. At age 4, before we came to Canada, on April 29th, 1957, my birthday, my 4th birthday, we didn't have much money, and we went to a birthday party, my birthday party. And of the memories I have from childhood, 62 years ago, it's still quite a clear one. We went to my Aunt Sheila's house, and Sheila was my dad's sister. And they had a party for me with a cake, which was just amazing. I'd never had a cake before. And they gave me a box of Black Magic chocolates, which were so expensive at that time. It was a luxury. And I opened a package my aunt had made, given me, and it was cardboard soldiers, cutout soldiers. That's how little money they had. And I thought they were fantastic. And the best present was waiting for me. I opened this bag for my mom and dad. I'm sure it was from them. I'm pretty sure. It was a teddy bear. And I'd never had one. And I saw this bear, and I hugged it. I can remember absolutely what it was like. Thank you, Steve. It was the most amazing feeling. And I felt very, very safe. I put this bear on my lap, and I remember eating Black Magic chocolates. It was a marzipan one at that moment, and drinking tea, English, and holding on to this bear, and telling this bear I loved it. And so the day went on, and even great birthdays have to end. And so we got back on the Manchester bus to go back to Chatterton, double-decker English bus. On the top deck, me, my mom and dad, and my sister, who was 7 years older than me, with sweaters and raincoats and umbrellas. It was raining again. It was England. And so got back on the bus, and we got to our stop. We bundled off at the other end, and we're bustling out. And we walked about maybe 200 yards home, and we realized I'd left the bear on the bus. And it is no exaggeration to tell you the trauma from that had affected my life for 30 years. And I can not feel the feeling anymore, God be eternally praised, I'm free from the emotions. But I remember feeling incredibly grief-stricken and terrified at the same time. I felt like I'd lost my best friend. And so the things that are happening in the past have this inexorable progress to the present and the future. I mean, we as hypnotists, we have to owe a lot of our thanksgiving to the fact that snakes were really a big part of our history. If you go back to the sleep temples of Egypt thousands of years ago, people would be put in hypnotic states in these sleep temples. We know from the wall frescoes that show that they were clearly doing some sort of hypnosis and healing people. The Greeks picked up on it, dedicated the temples to their god Asclepius, who was a snake god. And back in those days, if you had a problem, they would put you in a hypnotic sleep in the temple of Asclepius, full of snakes. So it's not the place you go if you've got a frickin' snake phobia and you want to get rid of it. It's kind of counterproductive, but the symbol of Asclepius is the symbol of modern medicine. Now, there's been a mistake here. They've changed it into the caduceus, which is the staff of Hermes, Mercury, with the 2 wings, the phallic symbol, and the 2 snakes. Yes, it was a phallic symbol. 2 snakes entwined around it. The real symbol of medicine is the rod of Asclepius, which is a single rod with a snake curling around. The reason why is in our hypnotic history. It's also weird. People were prone in North Africa and the Middle East in those days to a parasitic infection called dracunculiasis. Now, this is when you would drink water that had fleas infested with the dracunculus larva. This would get in your body, and it was a horrible thing to have. In about a year, it would turn into about a 3-foot-long worm in your body. And it would erupt somewhere in the muscle, and you'd go to a doctor of the day, they'd slit it open and roll this worm onto a stick. And that became the symbol of modern medicine, the snake around the stick. But they were practicing hypnosis as well, because if you had a problem other than this, you would go to the sleep temple. The priests of Asclepius would set up this prestige, this situation phenomenally. They'd have torches and incense burning and people hitting drums and music, all the things that are common to every culture in the world, with the wise women, the wise men, the stories around the fire, all of which are trance-inducers. And if you were able to fall into this hypnotic trance in the temple, you would awaken, and in theory, your disease would be gone. And so that's sort of where hypnosis stagnated until 1000 AD. And then we had in Britain Edward the Confessor, who led to the illustrious order of the Bagmen of Edward the Confessor, who are having a meeting here this weekend. But Edward the Confessor was king of England, and it was believed that kings and queens, because they were put there by God himself, they had some sort of divine power. And if you could get an appointment with the king or queen, which was roughly as easy as getting an appointment with the Pope, then he would lay his hands, or she would lay her hands on you, and their healing virtue would pass to you, and you would be healed. Mostly of something called the king's illness, which was scrofula, a tuberculosis of the skin. And so Edward the Confessor would touch people. He had prestige. You know, prestige will get you very, very far in hypnosis. Touch someone, and they're healed. And this was happening, and it was well documented. And then things went silent again. We're waiting for the next breakthrough. And it happened in the mid-1700s, which is, of course, the 18th century, in Vienna. Maximilian Hell. Isn't that a great name? Father Hell. And it is H-E-L-L. He was a Jesuit priest, and he was working with bloodletting and with magnets. And back in those days, you did bloodletting for everything. They'd open a vein, bleed you a pint of blood, because you had too many poisonous humors in your blood that had to be taken out. How does it fit into hypnosis? In a weird way. Maximilian Hell was using magnetite, which is lodestone, which is a naturally occurring magnet. And when you would open your vein, he would then pass the magnet over it, and you'd watch this happen, and the bleeding would stop. Well, now we know that the indirect suggestion is causing platelet aggregation, forming a clot, and this stops. It's been documented for 100 years. But then they didn't know. They thought it was magnetic power. And one of Hell's students was a young Viennese doctor, Franz Anton Mesmer. And Mesmer was blown away by this. And he started doing all kinds of bloodletting. This is back when bloodletting was the cure for absolutely everything. And the interesting thing is, when you wanted someone to take your blood in Europe in that time, you went to a barber. A barber was the surgeon of the day. They set bones, they pulled out teeth, and they took blood. So you'd go in and say, short back and sides, you know, trim the goatee here. Oh, and take a pint of blood while you're at it. And for Fred Jackman, it would be the wig in this case we're talking about. So this was just what happened. And you'd hold on to this stick and bleed, and the stick would get all gory, and they'd wrap a bandage around, and that became the barber's pole. So when you see a red and white striped pole outside a barber's shop, that's the stick wrapped in bandages for bloodletting. It's basically saying, come and get a haircut and bone set and some bloodlet at the same time. Not many people realize this was so pervasive. The first president of the United States, George Washington, died from bloodletting. He was sick, and his surgeon who traveled with him, i.e. his barber, took a pint of blood. George got worse despite the fact that they'd removed all his antibodies and macrophages that he needed to fight the disease. And the barber said, he's getting worse, we better take another pint of blood. So they did. And amazingly, instead of restoring his health, it made him even worse. So after a third or fourth round of bloodletting, he succumbed to the pneumonia that he had. And the official record is that's what he died from. But Mesmer got into the bloodletting thing, and he got into the magnet thing, and he went back home, and he was doing all this. One day, he left his magnets at the office, and someone's sitting in the chair, he takes the blood, and there's no magnets to stop the bleeding. So Mesmer, being a smart man, grabs a pointer from the blackboard, a wooden pointer, passes it over the person's wrist, and amazingly, the bleeding stops. Now, unfortunately, Mesmer did not apply the correct razor, which is Occam's razor, which is the explanation that requires the fewest new hypotheses, is probably the likely one. He didn't say, oh, it's nothing to do with the magnets or the stick, it must be something else. He went one further and went, it must be me. I am Mesmer Man, magnetic powers. And he thought it was him. And he started magnetizing everything and stopping bleeding, and he got great results with his prestige. And talk about playing the theatrics. He couldn't lay hands on everybody. There were too many. Mesmer was a rock star. He went into Paris. He got so famous, everybody wanted to be treated by him. A lot of money. And so he set up what he called seances. And he'd have a baquette, a big tank with iron filings and rods and wine bottles and all these things. And people would hold on to them. And Mesmer would come in with incense burning. He'd wear a robe and a turban and carry a magic wand and come in and touch them. And the suggestion was so great, people would do the funky chicken, and then they'd be okay again after doing this big convulsive thing. And so he did so much of this, he started magnetizing trees to make it easier. You could just go touch the tree and do the funky chicken. Except sometimes they touch the wrong tree, and it still worked. But he wasn't catching what was happening here. And the regular medical profession in the area, they were against him. Nobody wanted him doing this stuff. He was getting too big, too famous, and he was curing things. And he was doing it through indirect suggestion and not even realizing what he was doing. And so Mesmer made the mistake of his career. He demanded a royal commission to investigate him to prove he had magnetic powers. Big mistake. Here's my first piece of advice to you. Don't demand a royal commission, ever. Start with that. Don't do it. Someone says, got a commission? Say, no, not interested. He appealed to the court of Louis XVI, the King of France. They got together a commission of about a couple of dozen people. Noteworthy people. Lavoisier, chemist. Benjamin Franklin, American statesman, Freemason, and ambassador to Paris, multilingual. And they also got a French pain management specialist, Dr. Guillotine. And yes, it's the same guy. It's the same guy. And he developed the ultimate pain management. You know, remove your head from your central nervous system. And so, Guillotine, strangely enough, Lavoisier, the chemist, who was also on the committee, he and one other person went to the guillotine later on in France. They didn't know at the time that he was preparing them for it. And they investigated Mesmer. And to be fair, they actually investigated one of his students. And then they said, we can't see any magnetic currents happening here. We think it's just imagination. Now, that was years before. We had positron emission tomography. We had functional MRIs where we can look at the human brain and see we're getting right brain activation, we're getting left brain quieting, we're getting corpus callosum firing, the brain hemispheres are talking to each other. Something's happening with hypnosis. It's in your brain, it's not just in your mind. And back then, they discredited him. Mesmer did not add anything of real value other than an interest in healing that could be created by this. Meanwhile, in India, you got James Esdale, who's a British Army surgeon, still doing mesmerism. He does 300 surgeries, serious surgeries, including an 80-pound testicular tumor removed with mesmerism as the anesthetic. One asks why one waits for it to reach 80 pounds before seeking medical attention, but such was the case. Esdale was amazing. He went to London, England to demonstrate his incredible powers, but under the gaze of the Royal College of Surgeons, he couldn't make anything work. He's in India, a hotbed of mysticism and open-mindedness. It was great there. He comes to London, yeah, I'm not into this mesmerism thing at all. It's probably not going to work. Didn't work for him at all. And things sort of went quiet. And we moved into the 1800s. And the late 1800s were the biggest in history, the biggest boom in history of hypnosis and interest in it. Until right now. We're currently in the huge boom of interest in hypnosis and related fields. And we need to act now to secure our place in it. Make sure it doesn't slip out of our grasp into the hands of people who don't know what the hell they're doing. And so in the 1800s, we had Bernheim. We had Bernheim, and Bernheim, one of his patients, he's a neurologist in France. He sends a patient to Libo. Libo deals with this woman who's got sciatica that Bernheim, even though he's a neurologist, could not fix. And all of a sudden, Libo hypnotizes her, and her sciatica disappears, or his sciatica disappears. Bernheim's amazed. He teams up with Libo. They become a hypnotic duo, and they're working together using just direct suggestion and hypnosis. Nobody knew anything about parts and ego states, anything about regression, but they were getting phenomenal results. Well documented. Meanwhile, in Salpêtrière, France, we got Charcot. Charcot was trying to bring back mesmerism. He works on a lot of different patients. He thinks they're all hysterics, and he worked only on women. I think usually young women, which makes me somehow question Charcot's motives. Well, one of his, after 20 years of fighting with Bernheim and Libo, one of Charcot's students was a young Viennese doctor, and it was Sigmund Freud. And Freud was a crap hypnotist. He was a useless hypnotist because he used so much cocaine, rubbed it on his gums, his dentures would fall out when he was doing hypnosis work. Now, can you imagine you saying, that's right, and your teeth fall out into your lap? I mean, even Erickson couldn't scare somebody that bad. And so, he didn't like it. Meanwhile, Breuer in his neighborhood, Breuer was an amazing hypnotist. And so Freud goes, okay, I'm out of here. He paves a whole new way for himself. He said, I'm going to create a new therapy. He said, this therapy will not be for the poor because it will take an average of 100 to 300 hours to effect a cure. He created psychoanalysis. whereupon you do not even have to have a psychodynamic loop with your subject, a person that you care about. Instead, you lie on a couch with your notes and say, tell me more about your father. Tell me more about your dreams. And hope that the person freely associates himself to a cure after 100 to 300 hours. And hypnosis almost disappeared off the scene. That was the closest we got to extinction at that moment. But, meanwhile in England, Braid was working. Braid saw a stage show by La Fontaine. Braid was working out of Manchester, England, sees the show, goes, this is amazing, and he comes up with the word hypnotism, meaning nervous sleep, except he didn't. It's one of those great hypnosis myths. I call it the AC/DC myth. It's like you can tell if someone's a real AC/DC fan, you say, who was AC/DC's first vocalist? And if they say Bon Scott instead of Dave Evans, they're wrong, and they're not a fan. Well, it's the same thing with Braid. Braid did not come up with the term hypnotism, nervous sleep. He was beaten to the punch 20 years in advance by a Frenchman, Etienne Henri Denin de Couillet. So it's easier to say Braid, so we say he invented it. So there was all this work going on, but it still started to die out, and the psychoanalysts really did get control. But we were rescued by a little thing you may remember, a bit of an upset, 1914, it was World War I. World War I changed everything, because for 4 years you had this enormous conflict in Europe that was the war to end all wars, and it didn't end because anybody won. World War I ended because of the Spanish flu. It was an unusual flu that only killed strapping young men in their 20s. It ignored young children and babies and elderly people and killed the young and the powerful and the strong. And there was nobody left to fight. So they basically said, let's go home. Yeah, okay. And they did, which was a great idea. But now you've got all these traumatized soldiers. Canadian, American, British, South African, New Zealanders, East Indian, Australian. All these soldiers are traumatized, PTSD, battle fatigue, whatever you want to call it. You bump something, they freak out, and it's horrible. Your amygdala is firing like crazy. How do you put thousands of soldiers through psychoanalysis? Well, you don't. So they took hypnosis back off the shelf and said, let's do this. They started abreacting people, de-traumatizing them, and it was working great. And then that was all done, so they put it back on the shelf, went back to psychoanalysis again. And then World War II rescued us, because the same thing happened, all these traumatized soldiers and civilians in that case too. And they took hypnosis back off the shelf again. And then someone had the sense to say, wait a minute, if this hypnotism thing is so good, why do we keep sticking it on the frickin' shelf? I said, oh, that's a good point. I wonder why we are doing that. They brought it back. And in around 1955, the British Medical Association made it a legitimate medical modality. The US followed 3 years later. Canada followed the year after that, because when the US sneezes, we get pneumonia. It's all. And all of a sudden, you've got this real thing, this medical thing. And it exploded. It went into this amazing time. And in 1900, May the 6th, a significant event happened, because that's when Dave Ellman was born. And Dave Ellman is one of the two greatest pioneers in hypnotic history, without a doubt. He was one of the first to use real regression work, and the other, of course, was Milton Erickson. And they were opposite sides of the same coin. But even though they did not get along, they both brought so much wealth to our field that by drawing from both sides of it, that's where we become really good at this stuff. And I applaud Larry Ellman and Cheryl Ellman for continuing Dave Ellman's work to this day and finding their way here. Year after year, they keep coming back. Respect, my friend. And then there's the people keeping Erickson's work alive, people like Ernest Rossi and Jeffrey Zeig and Bandler and Grinder and so on. We have this enormous field. And right now, it has never been easier to learn this subject and to learn it really well. So here's my first key to you. There's 3. Our first Hypnothoughts, we made friends with our dear friend Carl Smith, and one of the nicest and funniest guys you'll ever meet, and an amazing, amazing hypnotist. And we were talking about how all these people are here, from all these different fields and different backgrounds, and Carl said something to me I've never forgotten. It was wisdom indeed. It may be the only piece of wisdom Carl has ever offered. Fully prepared to accept that. But he said to me, there is no competition. And that hit me like a bucket of cold water. Well, you think about it. 7 billion people in this world, a few thousand people doing hypnosis to any degree. We cannot possibly do all the work that is out there. It's inconceivable. Zig, 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 zig. Sure, easy for you to say. Try saying that after 5 hits of acid. Zig Ziglar, the motivational speaker, he said you can get anything you want out of life if you help enough other people get what they want. And it's absolutely true. The more we help other people move, excel, get ahead, it really does come back. Call it karma, call it the Tao, call it providence, whatever. I'm your card-carrying Presbyterian elder, but it works. It comes back. The good stuff comes back as we help each other. The second point is, Chris, when he built the Hypnotic World Epicenter, Toronto, Canada, we have this thing that we believe you've got to learn from the best. And we honestly do tell our students, keep learning from the others. Don't take our word as gospel. We wanted to learn from the best teachers in the world. And we had this freaking brilliant idea. I've been dragging my ass around the world for 45 years. I thought, I don't do it anymore. I thought, what if we bring them to us? So we set up what we call the Toronto deal. We did an experiment. We brought Carl Smith to Toronto to teach a weekend of kinetic shift and hypnosis. It was phenomenal. Everyone loved it. And Chris and I got to take Carl's course and learn his cool stuff. So that went so well, we said, who's next? It's got to be Melissa Tears. We brought Melissa to Toronto, had a phenomenal weekend. She blew everybody away. And it continued to build. And then we brought James Tripp from England. And that was mind-blowing. With James, there's all this hypnotic weirdness that's just so fantastic. And he said, who's next? I said, we've got to bring one of the Jacquelines. I want either Anthony Jacqueline or Freddie Jacqueline in Toronto, because these guys, I've got to learn from them. I have such respect for them. And thank God we got both of them. We got Anthony and Freddie for a whole weekend. If you have not studied with these guys, you must. In my honest opinion, Freddie Jacqueline is the #1 hypnotherapist on the planet. He absolutely is. What he does is mind-blowing. So to be able to learn from him was phenomenal. And next, we've got Michael C. Anthony coming, bringing mentalism and stage hypnosis in a weekend. And then we've got Bob Burns coming from Scotland, and we're currently looking at seeing if we can bring David Snyder, phenomenal, Mr. Everything, David Snyder to Toronto as well. So here's my point in all that. I'm not saying, oh, look at what we're bringing from Toronto. I'm saying these are people we learn from. We want to learn from them because they're the best. So that's step 2. #1 is there's no competition. Number 2 is never stop learning. Never, never, never stop learning. We never arrive. And here's number 3. 1986. Interesting year. Mandel is a Jewish name. I said, I'm a card-carrying Presbyterian. I don't know how that happened. And my wife, her birthday is Christmas Day. So Christmas is a huge thing in our house. And we don't have a lot of families, so we really have a great time together. And I cook her breakfast and stuff and get her birthday presents and all these things. One Christmas, 1986. My wife knew my whole life story, all the things that happened to me as a kid. And we'd opened all the presents. How many of you remember that amazing film, A Christmas Story, with Ralphie and yeah, filmed just up the road from me in Toronto. It was filmed in the studio 2 blocks from my house, weird. All the English shots. Ralphie once says Daisy, Red Ryder BB gun, 300 shots or whatever, the compass in the stock, and it's the last present he opens, and it blows his mind, represents tears. It's great. My wife freaking did that to me. Christmas Day, we opened all our presents, and she opens her presents and her birthday presents. We've been married almost 38 years, and I still call her my first wife, just to keep her on. So we opened the presents, and then she said, I think there's one more behind that furniture there, just like in A Christmas Story. I instantly, what? Pull this thing up. And she said, oh, it says to Mike. So I ripped the paper off. It was a teddy bear. You know the story, right? And what happened was, that wounded childhood ego state that had been hiding for 30 years became executive at that moment. I hugged that bear. His name Teddy was on his shirt. I hugged that bear, and I was racked with sobbing and wailing for like 5 solid minutes. And the healing started at that moment. And I'm proud to say to you, as a 66-year-old man, that bear sleeps in my freaking bed with me every night. What a wife I have, Lisa. Lisa's my wife's best friend, and she can never get through this story. Oh. Anyway, that's point 3. Guys, we never arrive this side of eternity. We never learn it all. We never become perfect. Do the self-work. Look into the frickin' abyss, face the darkness in your golden soul, and get it cleared out. I have not arrived. But God be praised, my wife will tell you I'm a hell of a lot better now than I was a few years ago. We are always working to become more integrated, to become an empty vessel. And the clearer we become, the more we pass that on to other people. So number 1, there's no competition. Help each other. Build bridges, not barriers. Number 2, never stop learning. The best people in the world are in this room right now. And number 3, do the self-work. Face the darkness. Fix the pain. It's the best thing we can all do. And the man saw that boy throwing the pebbles into the water. And then he realized it wasn't. The raging sea in the night with the storm in Port, Maine, had washed in thousands upon thousands of tiny starfish. Beautiful. And all asphyxiating away from the water. And this little boy was systematically throwing them back in the ocean. And the man was touched by this kid's kindness. And he said, son, what you're doing is a very good thing. And he said, there's thousands of them. You cannot possibly make a difference. The boy picked up a starfish, looked at it, threw it in the ocean. And he said, I just made a difference for that one. I made a difference for that one. God bless you all. Thank you.